What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Sean Jones NBA Show. I'm recording this on Sunday, June 15th. We had Game 4 of the NBA Finals this past Friday night between the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Indiana Pacers, in which the Thunder took down Indiana 111-104 in what was a very fun back-and-forth game that Oklahoma City really stole down the stretch. So we're going to talk all things Game 4, as well as we had a pretty big trade go down with Desmond Bane getting sent to Orlando earlier today. So I will talk through that deal for both Orlando and Memphis and all the implications on both sides. So with that said, let's go ahead and get right into it. So I'm going to start off with a little bit of a recap of Game 4. There was a noticeable lineup change to start out this one. Obviously, there was a little bit of controversy to start off the series with Mark Daigneault electing to bench Isaiah Hartenstein, who had started for them all season long in favor of Cason Wallace. That decision had been talked about quite a bit, and in this Game 4, they decided to go back to their starting five that had gotten them to this point, with Hartenstein back in the starting lineup and going with the two big look. So really the biggest matchup differences here, they put Hartenstein on Siakam, who had been guarded by Jalen Williams. Williams was on Nembhard instead. They moved SGA over to Nesmith, who had been on Nembhard. And then on the Indiana side of things, Turner shifted over to Hartenstein. Siakam was on Chet Holmgren. And then pretty much everything else was the same across the board. But this was the first game of the series where Indiana actually got off to a good start. They went up 11-6 early in this one. Role players were hitting shots. Halliburton was looking a little bit more aggressive as a passer and playmaker. Then they end up with a 24-15 lead towards the middle part of that first quarter. And like I mentioned, they just had not been good at any point in any of these other games. After Game 1, they were down 9 after 1. After Game 2, they were down 6 after 1. After Game 3, they were down 8 after 1. So to see them get off to a fast start definitely made you feel like maybe they had gained a little bit of confidence from winning Game 3 the way that they did. But part of that hot start was because SGA was very uninvolved early. He was not really getting many shots up. He wasn't bringing the ball up. He had only 2 points in the first 11 minutes of the game. And Jalen Williams was doing a lot of the heavy lifting in the first quarter. He ended up with 12 points in that quarter. The Thunder also were a little bit sloppy. Siakam had 4 steals alone just in the first quarter. And the Pacers found themselves up only by 1 point at the end of the first quarter, despite having a 9-point lead earlier in the quarter. But like I mentioned, that was a big improvement from where they had been in some of the previous games. The Thunder did switch up their rotation a little bit as well here. SGA had typically been playing the entire first quarter and sitting at the beginning of the second quarter, kind of mirroring Halliburton's minutes a little bit. But in this one, they switched it up where they actually took him out earlier in the first quarter, like in the midway point. And then that way he could start the game on the court in the second quarter to maybe stagger that with Halliburton a little bit to take advantage of those minutes when he wasn't in. But the second quarter was very back and forth. OKC did go on a 7-0 run midway through the quarter to go from down 1 to up 6, but then Indiana finished the quarter very well. They went on a 15-6 run themselves to go from down 6 to up 3, and they found themselves up 60-57 at half, with Siakam leading the way with 14 points. The second half, Hartenstein started once again, but it was a little bit of a quicker hook this time for Caruso, who had an awesome game in this one, and he's just been a part of their better lineup so far, especially in this series. And the Pacers got off to a great start once again. It was tied at 62, and then they go on a 12-4 run to find themselves up 74-66. Then the Thunder punch back in what was a fun back-and-forth quarter. They go on a 6-0 run to cut it to 74-72. But then the Pacers once again play one of their best stretches of the series here. Their defense just looked ridiculously good. They even forced an 8-second count. Was just phenomenal. Obi Toppin minutes on both ends. He hit a couple threes after turning one down on a previous possession. Big highlight momentum dunk. Even blocked a shot late on shot clock from OKC. And they extended their lead all the way up to 10 points with another 12-4 run. So it was 86-76. Pacers had the ball. Obi Toppin gets fouled, going to the line to put them up by 12. But it was kind of a turning point from there because he missed both free throws, and then everything went downhill for Indiana from there. OKC goes on a 13-3 run to tie it at 89. The Pacers only have those 3 points over the span of 6 minutes of game time. So they got really cold down the stretch offensively. They did still find themselves up 103-99 with 3 minutes and 20 seconds remaining in the game. But then SGA hits a big three coming off a screen. Then a minute later hits what was ended up being somewhat of a controversial no call where he hits a 15-footer on the baseline. Could have maybe been a push off, could have maybe been a travel. Indiana did not get another bucket the rest of the way. And the Thunder end the game on a 12-1 run. And in the final 3:20 of this game, the Pacers were 0 of 5 from the field, 1 of 4 from the free throw line. They had 1 turnover, and they just completely imploded down the stretch. Very unlike them from what we've seen in the postseason. Late in that quarter, Nesmith fouls out. They put Mathurin in. He just completely disaster class minutes from him. He was 1 from 4 from the free throw line in just the last minute of the game. He had 2 fouls before the inbound where they were going to have to foul, but he did it before the ball was inbounded, which of course is a shot and the ball. So 2 free points. He missed 3 at the line. And so that was just it. I talked about this on the last pod, but when he's at his best, it can be great. But when he's at his worst, it can be really ugly. And that's what it was down the stretch of this one. But overall, the Pacers get outscored 31-17 in the fourth quarter. They only had 18 points in the final 14 minutes of game time. As I said, the offense was extremely stagnant. They couldn't get anything going. It was very sloppy with the ball, no movement from players or from the ball. And so the Thunder do end up winning this one 111-104 to win game 4 and tie the series at 2 apiece. And normally I start these off talking about the team that won and how they won, but I just feel like I need to talk about the Pacers to start this because I thought they really, really blew this game. Like they had this game in the bag and all they needed to do was put up a semi-competent fourth quarter and they could not do that. And I worry if this is the game we're going to look back on when the Thunder win the series and say, man, if they had just closed that game a little bit better, things could have turned out differently for them. But they've been the definition of a 48-minute team all playoffs that doesn't stop playing until the final buzzer sounds. And they were a 45-minute team in this game. Those last 3 minutes, they just did not show up. They, on the offensive end, looked like a shell of what we've seen them look like. And what makes this one hurt so much more for them is that so many stats went their way. Like they've had some clear focal points for Carlisle and this coaching staff, and it felt like they executed a lot of those really well. Like it would be different if OKC came in and just kind of jumped out to a hot start and was the aggressor the whole way and won this game. It sounds weird, but I almost would feel more confident in Indiana moving forward if that was the case, because it would just be kind of a throwaway game where they can just play better the next game. But OKC, there's a lot of things that were ugly on their part in this game too. They had only 3 3-pointers made and only 16 attempts. It's really hard to win in 2025 when you go 3 of 16 from the 3-point line, let alone in an NBA Finals game. They had only 11 assists as a team. SGA did not have a single assist for the first time since 2020. Like these are just stats that seem impossible for OKC to be able to overcome. Maybe one of them, but to all of these compiled together, it's just really an improbable win on their part. And that's, like I said, what makes it so much more brutal for Indiana, because not only did they have a really good chance to win this, they were in the driver's seat and they executed on a lot of the things they wanted to and still couldn't pull it out. And so they just, down the stretch, in the final 14 minutes of this game, they had only 18 points. They were 5 of 22 from the field. They were 0 of 9 from 3, 8 of 14 from the free throw line. They only had 1 assist in that 14-minute span. So just not Pacers basketball. And I mean, obviously give credit to Oklahoma City's defense because they were spectacular down the stretch. But Indiana just did a lot of this to themselves, in my opinion, because they just had such limited ball movement. They looked a lot like they did early in game one and in parts of game two, totally got away from what they had done for all of game three and for the majority of game four, especially the first half and parts of that third quarter. Pascal Siakam, who's been kind of like the mismatch for them in this series, where a lot of the adjustments OKC has made is to counter that matchup and be able to guard him properly. He was not involved at all in the fourth quarter. He had only one field goal attempt, 0 points after 20 points in the first three quarters, and being a big part of why they had built up the lead they had. And like I said, they just did not play Pacers basketball. And it was just not a good representation of what's gotten them here. And again, they were in prime position to go up 3-1 in the NBA Finals with 3 opportunities to win one game to be NBA champions. And I really worry if that was their chance. And they squandered it. And I don't know if they'll be able to recover. I don't know if they're going to be able to come back from this just because the Thunder are really good. And so every opportunity you have to take them out, you have to take advantage, especially when you're this big of an underdog like Indiana is. But on the Thunder side of things, I kind of mentioned some of these things, but this was a weird game for them in a lot of ways. A lot of things did not go their way, as I mentioned. I mean, they were 3 for 16 from three. As I said, they had only 3 corner three-pointer attempts. This is only the third time in the last 10 seasons where a team made 3 or less threes in a playoff game and won. And I'm sure that is going to become more and more scarce just with how the NBA has developed and how shooting has become such an important part of it in the modern NBA. They took 52% of their shots from the mid-range, which is a crazy high number. Like that, if you're Indiana, that is exactly what you wanted from your defense to force them into that kind of shot profile. OKC had only 11 assists as a team. Like in game 3, Halliburton had 11 assists himself. And as a team, they had only 11 in this game. This is only the 25th playoff win for a team that had 11 or less assists in a game this century. So that's 25 times in 25 years. So not like absolutely crazy that it never happens or anything like that, but still once per postseason, basically this century. And in the finals, it's only the third time since the merger. So very, very rare to win a finals game with that kind of limited passing, playmaking, ball movement that OKC had in this game. And a lot of that's because their starting point guard for them all season long, SGA, had 0 assists himself. And there's only been 11 finals games ever with a guy to score 30 plus points and have 0 assists. And only 3 of them were this century, which is Klay Thompson back in 2019 and Tim Duncan back in 2013. But neither of those guys are point guards. Like they're notorious. I mean, Tim Duncan's a big man, and then Klay Thompson's notorious for being an off-ball player. And so SGA, who has been their initiator all season long, to have 0 is significant. And the 10 previous times that it happened ever before this, those teams were 2-8 when their player did that. Obviously, it's 3-8 now. They win this game. But I just say all to this to say that it was a weird game. A lot of things didn't go their way. They tried the 2 big thing again, and it didn't go well. That starting 5 in 9 minutes had a minus 17.8 net rating. Like they just weren't very good. They had 139 defensive rating. They were getting cooked defensively on that end of the court, and it felt that way watching. I mean, Indiana was taking advantage of Hartenstein because that just with the 2 bigs out there, they're just more vulnerable guarding some of the perimeter players on Indiana that can attack those guys. And so to have all these things happen and still win this game, it's a testament to, I mean, just how good this team is, obviously. But they did do some things well also. Like they tweaked the dynamic between SGA and Jalen Williams in this one. So it's been talked about a little bit by people after the game, but they completely shifted the ball handling responsibilities away from Shea and towards Jalen Williams. And Jalen Williams did a great job with that. But I think they wanted to conserve SGA for later in the game, just so he wasn't so gassed, because game 3, it just really looked like by the end he was drained because they were making him work on defense. He was having to do so much for them offensively, so he just didn't have enough in the tank. But in this one, they took the ball out of his hands for the majority of the game, and it led to him having 15 points in the final 4:38 of the game. So it definitely worked. I mean, he had more energy down the stretch and was able to be the closer they need him to be. But also, this strategy only worked because Jalen Williams did a really good job too. He was awesome in this game, 27 points, 7 rebounds, 3 assists, went 11 of 11 from the free throw line. He was also really good in game 3. So that's been a nice switch up because he was not very good in the first 2 games of this series. Obviously, taking the ball out of Shea's hands had its downsides, like the whole they didn't have many assists as a team kind of thing. But it did work to conserve him. Williams was awesome in that role. And I also thought this was one of the adjustments that I called for in my last podcast, was that it was too much your turn, my turn between J-Dub and SGA. They did way more two-man game in this game between the two of them, and just having both of them involved in the action so that it makes sense. You put your 2 best players as the primary action on the offensive possession. I'm sure something as good is going to happen more often than not. I think they've been reluctant because it's Neesmith and Nemhard as the 2 defenders, so probably their 2 best perimeter defenders involved in the play, but it did work for them down the stretch of this. And I thought it made the offense a lot more fluid despite the low assist numbers down the stretch. And that was why they were able to, put up 30 plus points in the fourth quarter when Indiana kind of ran out of gas on their end. And then even SGA's whole substitution pattern was different. Like I mentioned during the recap, like they were just playing him at different times of the game. I think they tried to get more minutes with him on and Halliburton off to try to take advantage of those, because those have been kind of swing minutes in these games. Like Indiana won those minutes in a big way in game 3, and that's why they were able to win. And they lost those minutes in a big way in game 2, and that's why they didn't win. So they took advantage of those in this one as well. But the main story of this one, of why they pulled this out, and the whole reason that they are in the position they are in at all, is because of their defense. They were spectacular, just ridiculous defensively with their effort in that fourth quarter in particular. I mean, Lou Dort was a madman, showed why he was a candidate for Defensive Player of the Year this year. Chet Holmgren was awesome switching onto ball handlers in that fourth quarter. And that's why I've been advocating for the one big lineup in this matchup and in this series, because it makes them so much more versatile defensively, makes them more switchable defensively. And he was great. He was contesting everything. They were challenging him, and he was up to the task. They just completely got the Pacers out of their flow. They had almost nothing in the paint. Looked a lot like the first 2 games of this series. No ball movement, limited player movement. Like, they kept them out of transition. They had transition opportunities on only 7% of their possessions, which is super low. This is obviously a team that's been one of the best in the NBA, if not the best in the NBA, at getting out in transition, taking advantage of those opportunities. And look, defense has been their calling card all year long, and they did it again. And this is why I've been so bullish on this team, because defense is something that will always translate. Of course, matchups are going to be different depending on who you're playing and what players are going up against and what teams and schemes and whatnot. But defense and playing hard on that end, those are the things that they travel more often than not. And so they just showed why they were one of the most dominant defenses really in the history of the NBA this season. Also, cannot go without mentioning Alex Caruso, who was spectacular in this game. 20 points, 5 steals on 7 of 9 shooting. He was even hitting fadeaway middies. We know what he brings to the table defensively, but he was just spectacular in this game, and such a just veteran presence, like he's been for them all postseason long. He's been exceptional for them, and that trade is proving to be a real championship winner for them. Like, if they go on to win this series and are champions, you can pretty confidently say they would not have gotten to that point without Alex Caruso on this team and the impact that he's had, because he's just been spectacular on both ends of the court. But credit to Mark Dagnall just for making some of those tweaks. Of course, it's easy to say that, you make adjustments and you win. You can always just say, well, it was a good adjustment. And if you make them and you lose, then you can look like an idiot sometimes. But the point is, he's been willing to be flexible, try out different lineups, try out different things, strategies, and playing styles for the team. Not all of them have worked, but some of them have looked like in some ways they have. And so, again, credit to him for not being stubborn and at least experimenting here and there with different looks and lineups. The only thing I will say for him is I feel like it's just such a low-hanging fruit is to just start Caruso. I don't know why he's so hell-bent on having him come off the bench. Like, the Hartenstein minutes with the starting lineup have not been good in this series. Kason Wallace, he has not been super impactful in this series either, but Caruso clearly has. And he takes away a lot of the worries of the Siakam mismatches because he can guard up. Like, he also allows them to still be switchable and versatile on the defensive end and provide shooting. So, like, I just feel like he brings everything to the table that they need out of that fifth spot next to their core four guys. And so if I were Dagnall, I would just cut to the chase, start Caruso. You could play him more minutes, playing the same amount of minutes. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But I just feel like he's clearly been one of their best five guys. And it's a disservice to not have him out there to start and finish these games, even though he has been finishing most of the games. But on the Pacers side of things, I mean, there's definitely a couple things that they need to clean up. And I won't say full on adjustments, but just because we're already, I mean, once you get to game 5, game 6, there's really only so many things you can try. You've probably experimented with most things that you're going to, but just a few things for them to clean up. It is just clearly not a Miles Turner series, unfortunately. He's been a great story with him being there for so long and whatnot, but I think he's been fine in the two big lineups because it's just more traditional and he can get away with some of his limitations there because of the two bigs. But in the one big lineups, he's just getting killed. I mean, he's getting attacked defensively continuously. It doesn't help that he has shot the ball terribly as well. 4 for 20 from 3, sub 40% from the field on this series. He's only 4 rebounds a game too. So like, he's just not really contributing anywhere. He's averaging 2 blocks a game. So like, he's been a good rim protector for them. But just in terms of like, he's getting exposed in the pick and roll defensively. He's not helping them much offensively. He's not rebounding the ball. It's just been a rough series for them. And that it's compounded by the fact that Obi Toppin is having a particularly good series. And he's been the main guy that's in there when Turner is not, because they've pretty much cut out the Thomas Bryant minutes altogether, which something that I was calling for. And I'm glad that Carlisle finally did that because those minutes have been rough. But Toppin's averaging 11.6 rebounds, 49% from the field, 38% from 3. And they've just been so much more switchable defensively when he's out there. He's made more shots than Turner. His energy and athleticism has been impactful for big stretches of this series. It feels like a lot of their best lineups have been with him and Siakam out there together. And Turner in this series, he's a minus 7.5 net rating when he's on the court. And their starting five that they've had all year is a minus 5.7 net in 53 minutes in this series. And that's opposed to when Toppin is out there in Turner's place with the 4 other starters, they are a plus 20.8. So that's just been a better look for them. And I think a lot of it is, like I said, Toppin, first of all, has just made more shots, which it sounds like, of course, over the sample size of a full season, you're going to trust your guys to get going. But like, there's not a lot of games left. Like, sometimes you just got to ride the hot hand in some of these situations. And then, like I said, I think defensively, he's been able to hold his own a little bit more because he can guard the perimeter at least a little bit better than Turner can, where he's really, really struggled there. I also think that they've been way too inconsistent with Siakam's involvement. Like, when he's involved, they're just really good, and they've looked a lot better. Like, to start this game, he was super involved, and they looked good. We've seen him go at mismatches with Wallace and other players and been successful doing so. But like, down the stretch of this game, I mean, they just completely went away from him. 1 field goal attempt is just not enough for him in the fourth quarter of a close game at home. And like I said, he's been like the driver for a lot of OKC's adjustments and lineup tweaks because they're trying to combat the mismatch that he is, because he is a mismatch. He's quick and agile, so you can't really put bigs on him, but he's big and strong, can shoot over smaller guys too. And they just don't really have a comparably sized body type defender to Siakam. Like, Jalen Williams is typically guarding power forwards a lot, but he's only 6'5", and then you don't really want a 7-footer guarding Siakam either. So he's been the mismatch, and so when they go away from him, they're doing OKC a favor, because that it's not even just that he needs to score more. It's that when he gets the ball in the paint, it collapses the defense, and then it just opens up shooters on the perimeter, and just their offense goes so much better when he's more involved. So I think they need to prioritize that a little bit more in the next couple games. I think they need to continue to abuse Hartenstein in his minutes and the 2 big minutes, which I think they've done a good job of, but that's just something they need to continue to focus on. I also think they could consider extending minutes to some of their top guys. Like, Siakam and Halliburton, they've been playing in the 35 to 36 minute range. And I'm like, would it kill them to try to get them up to 40 or something like that? Like, they've only played 40 minutes when there's been overtime games. They haven't reached that mark in any regulation games in this playoffs to this point. And like, I guess you could argue like they're trying to conserve them, and that's why they're able to play the way that they are. So I understand that kind of pushback there. But I'm also like, I'm sorry, like fourth quarter of a close game, like those guys just got to be out there. They got to be out there. And like, it just feel like they, once we're at this point in the NBA finals, you throw a lot of that stuff out the window and you just got to get those guys in for as much as they physically can play. And I don't know if they're really looking at that, but I don't know. I feel like a lot of the issues for them in this game, it's not big adjustments or tactical things or anything like that. I just felt like they had a stretch of basketball that they didn't play their brand of basketball. And if you do that for one quarter, and it can cost you a game when you're playing a 68 win team. And that's exactly what happened. Like, they did not get out in transition. I mentioned only 7% of their possessions. They were too stagnant in the half court late. They didn't get the ball in the paint late. And like, they did all of these things well earlier in the game. They did them all well in game 3. But you just can't go 14 minutes scoring only 18 points in the NBA finals and expect to win. Like, even with all the things that went their way, you can have a bad 3-4 minute stretch, but it can't be 14 minutes. And so to me, it really is kind of that simple in this game. But it was an opportunity that they definitely missed, like I mentioned. But the question now is, who's got the upper hand? You know, it's 2-2 going back to OKC. The Thunder were big favorites coming into the series, obviously, as we've talked about. But Indiana clearly has proven that they are up to the battle. I mean, they look like they belong. They've looked comfortable enough against OKC for large stretches where it wasn't like some fluke that they're in the position that they're in. But to me, I still think the answer is very clear that OKC is absolutely in the driver's seat. They are in control. They should be, I won't say feeling comfortable because it's the NBA Finals. You should never feel comfortable, but headed back home for what's essentially now a best of 3, and they have 2 of the games at home. I think they got to feel really good because they have also been dominant at home in this playoffs. They have a plus 22 net rating at home in the postseason. They're 9-2, but both of their losses came on very strange endings where they kind of blew it, and it was a game winner almost at the buzzer in both instances, and they really had no business losing those games. So they've been almost unbeatable at home. I mean, it basically takes some fluky finish to even have a chance against them in their building in the postseason. And also, talked about this on the last pod, but they're in the exact same position they were just in against Denver. Like, game 1, they lose on some weird last minute comeback game winning shot at home and kind of a stunning finish. Game 2, they win going away. Convincing, easy win, up double digits pretty much the whole game. Game 3, they lose in a close game that they led for a large portion of before the other team kind of just out-executed them late in the game. And then game 4, they win after being down by a decent margin in the fourth quarter on a comeback win on the road to steal one. So as I described that, those are the exact series script of both the Nuggets series and this series. And obviously that ended up going 7, but they won it comfortably in the 7th game. So they've been here before. There's no part of this series where they should feel like they can't get through it because they quite literally have gotten through exactly it. And so to me, OKC just clearly has the upper hand, but a lot of this just because they're really good. Like, I'm not saying this because I think the Pacers have no chance. I think they've proven that they belonged. I said this on my last podcast, like, they are championship worthy. I firmly believe that. And it's not that I think they're not good enough. I just think that the Thunder are that good, and I think that was a game they had to have. I said on my last podcast, I thought the winner of game 4 was going to win the series. And I firmly believe if Indiana had pulled that out, I think they would have won the series. I just don't think they were going to lose 3 straight games with how they've played and how good they've looked for months now, even with how good OKC is. But now it's just like the series is getting shorter, and OKC, I know that they've clearly proven to be susceptible to losing. I mean, they've lost some games in this playoffs, but they are just, to me, still a juggernaut dominant team until proven otherwise to me. I picked them all season long. I picked them going into the playoffs, picked them going into this series. And so I think if you're them, you got to feel really good. And Indiana, I know in a vacuum, you'd say 2-2. How do you not feel good as a big underdog like that? But given the context of that last game and the fact that they had it and blew it, I just feel like it's going to be really, really tough for them to pull this thing out. And I expect OKC to win game 5. I would not be surprised if they wrapped it up in 6 games back in Indiana, but I also could see it going 7. So I would be pretty surprised, not shocked, but surprised if Indiana came back to win at this point. But these have been awesome games. This has been an awesome series. I think these teams are both capable. And so I can't totally rule it out. But again, you'd have to think the winner of game 5 is probably going to win the series. But we'll see. Okay, so shifting over away from the finals, there's been a lot of chatter about trades, potential deals, people saying this could be one of the crazier off seasons we've seen in a while. I fully expect Kevin Durant to get traded probably within the next few days, at least before the draft is what everyone's saying. But we actually had a deal go down, and the Orlando Magic acquired Desmond Bane from the Grizzlies. The Magic get just Desmond Bane, nothing else back from Memphis, but the Grizzlies get Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Cole Anthony, 16th overall pick in this year's draft, a 2026 Phoenix first round pick, a 2028 Orlando first round pick, a 2030 Orlando first round pick, and a 2029 Orlando first round swap, which all of the picks coming from Orlando are fully unprotected in this deal. So Desmond Bane, he has 4 years left on his 5-year, $197 million contract, and he turns 27 next week. So on the Magic side of things for this, there's no way around it that this is a pretty steep price. I mean, it is somewhat comparable to the Mikal Bridges return, just a ton of picks for a guy that's not like a non-all-star. And so I could understand people first seeing the price and having a weird reaction to it. But I also just want to say that I think the quality of the picks is something you have to talk about, and it doesn't get talked about enough because not all first round picks are created equally, as we've seen. Like just looking down at the picks, the one of them is the 16th pick this year. So, fine pick. Not like it's the back end of the first round, but it's not a lottery pick. They're not going to necessarily draft a star with that spot unless you get really lucky. The Phoenix pick is the one where that one probably will be a lottery pick, and that is, again, probably the best asset in this deal for them. But then the rest of them are probably going to be picks in the 15 to 30 range. Like Orlando is going to be really good over the next 5 to 10 years, probably. And so those picks down the line are less concerning to me. But when Paolo's 27 years old, they'll have all of their picks fully restocked. So just as he's hitting his prime. So this doesn't kill their like long-term hopes of contending with the core because their core is still really, really young. And then on top of that, the Magic, they didn't have to give up Jalen Suggs. They didn't have to give up Anthony Black. They didn't have to give up Tristan da Silva. So all their younger players weren't really in the deal. Cole Anthony goes out, but I feel like he kind of is what he is at this point at best, an energy guard off the bench. Never been a big Anthony fan. I think he's a little too inefficient and not good enough defensively for my liking, but can still get some buckets at times. And then additionally, they get off the KCP contract, which 2 years remaining, $43 million. Not like it's terrible, but the sentiment around the reports coming out were that the front office has pretty much viewed that as a negative asset to this point, just with the contract. And he had a really down year this year. I mean, 34% from three was his lowest since 2016, back when he was only 22 years old. It was his lowest points per game since his rookie season. And he really struggled just because of the lack of creators that Orlando has. And I mean, KCP's used to playing with Jokic and LeBron. And then, even like Bradley Beal is 1 year in Washington. Beal at that point was still a way better creator than any of the guards that Orlando had on this team last year. So with all that context and the people they didn't have to give up and the quality of the pick and just with how bad the East is going to be and the opportunity for them to vault up into close to contender territory, I completely understand why they did this. Like when the Mikal Bridges trade went down, I said I thought it had potential to be like one of the biggest overpays ever. And in retrospect, it might be that. But I don't really feel that way about this one because I think these picks are going to be more meh than the New York ones have a potential to be. But also, I just feel like this is it's just such a seamless fit, and it was probably realistically the best guard they were going to be able to add. They obviously had to go get somebody, and it kind of had to be guard because the two best players are front court guys right now. There wasn't really an obvious fit for some of the better forward scorers like a Lauri Markkanen, for example. And there wasn't a lot of high premium guards out on the market right now. The point is, Bane is really good and probably the best player they could have gotten. And I think the reason the cost was higher is because they basically had to pay a premium on a guy who wasn't really like quote unquote available. Like I'm sure obviously they were open to trading him, but it's not like a Durant situation or even like a Jimmy Butler last year, or any of these where it's like, okay, everybody knows we're trading this guy. We're just fielding whatever the best package is going to be. Like I'm sure Orlando had to really convince them that this was the worth their while to trade a guy who's in the prime of his career and has been a 20 plus point per game scoring guy. And so they had to pay a little extra. I get it. I don't really get behind the wow, they give 4 first round picks for Desmond Bane of all people. Like I think it's understandable. Context is super important here. And I think this has a chance to be a really, really good deal for Orlando. And look, the obvious reason they went out and got him is because how poor this team has been shooting the basketball. They shot 31.8% from three last season. When I looked that up, I knew they were bad. I don't think I realized it was that bad. Like sub 32% as a team is just crazy. They were 2% lower than the next lowest team. Like league average is 36%. So over 4% below league average. That's a massive difference there. I wasn't able to find the data on like the biggest relative 3-point shooting gap between league average and a team in a season, but I have to imagine that was probably pretty close up there. You know what I mean? That was as bad as it gets. And if you just look at some of the other teams that were in the bottom 9 of shooting 3-point range this year, Magic bottom, but then you had Wizards, Hornets, Sixers, Blazers, Nets, Pelicans, Raptors, Jazz. Those 8 teams averaged 24 wins collectively this year. So it was Orlando and then the worst teams in the league, basically, that could not shoot the ball this year. So it just shows you have to be able to shoot if you want to have success, especially come postseason time. And we've seen that 2 years in a row with Orlando where offense just looked ugly as hell in some of these important games in the playoffs, and they weren't able to win because of it. But Desmond Bane is about as good of a solution as you can get for that because the dude is a 41% shooter from 3 for his career on 6.3 attempts per game. If you look at every player in NBA history to shoot at least 6 threes per game for their career, only Steph and Clay have higher 3-point percentages. So what is widely regarded as the greatest shooting backcourt in NBA history, literally called the Splash Brothers. Like he's up there with those guys. And Clay is only 0.1% above Bane. So he very well could pass him as well, especially if Clay's numbers drop a little bit as he gets older because he's still playing, obviously. But since Bane came into the league in 2020, 2021, he has the best 3-point shooting in the league at his volume. So at the 6+ attempts, he's been number 1. Better than Steph, better than Clay, better than everybody else. So in terms of high volume shooters, he is quite literally, I mean, I won't say the best because I think we still will continue to reserve that title to Steph Curry. But outside of him, he's basically as good as it gets, if not the best guy after him. So to add that kind of shooting to a team that is so desperately needed shooting, I mean, it's a match made in heaven from that perspective. But I also just want to say, Desmond Bane is not just a shooter. He has really nicely developed the other aspects of his game since coming into the league. Because when he came in, he was really just advertised as a spot-up shooter. He not a great athlete, didn't have much creation or anything on the offensive end, questions about his defense, but we knew he could shoot. That was why he was a first-round prospect. But none of those worries are really still there anymore because he's developed into a really nice secondary ball handler and initiator. I mean, he got a lot of experience even as the number 1 guy when Ja Morant has been out, and he's missed a lot of time over the last few years. This is a guy that's been running pick and rolls for the Grizzlies. Like he has proven capable as a guy that can initiate a little bit offensively. And he's averaged 5+ assists over the last 3 years. So he's very underrated as a passer, as a playmaker. Like anyone who thinks they're just getting like a spot up shooter, a guy who is going to just stand in the corner and shoot threes, like that is extremely inaccurate, extremely disingenuous to what Desmond Bane is as a player. And even on his defense, he's got a negative wingspan, definitely not the most athletic guy, but he's tough as hell. He's super strong, and he will not compromise Orlando's defensive identity, which that was a question mark for some of the guys that they were rumored to be targeting. I mean, the Anthony Simons match felt like a seamless one that people had brought up for a while, but you forget to mention, like, Anthony Simons is one of the worst defenders in the league, and this is a team that has relied heavily on their defense. So getting a guy like Bane, who, look, not an all defensive guy, not a dude who's going to come in and be your stopper, but more than can hold his own. And so I just think his skill set fits perfectly with what the Magic have and what they need. Like, they just needed someone who could stretch the floor that you really have to guard out there. They had too many guys that when Paolo or Franz drive into the basket that you could just cheat off of. And it makes those guys' life a lot more difficult. And Bane is just, you're going to have to pick your poison because Desmond Bane out in the corner, Paolo getting downhill in the paint, having to choose between that. Neither of those are great options if you're a defense trying to stop this team. But I think he's a great fit next to Suggs. I think he should be able to play perfectly off of Paolo and Franz as more downhill attackers. And I just think he's a huge upgrade across the board. So it's just, I don't know if you could have made a better fit for what Orlando needed and what Bane brings to the table. And he's, as I said, not just a shooter, but a really, really good all-around player. I will still say, though, I don't know if this solves all of their problems, because I think the narrative around Orlando has been that their shooting is by far the number one issue, which obviously it is a big issue, as we talked through some of those numbers. But the offense just sucked in general. And it's not just because this shooting. It's not just because the spacing. You can survive with not great spacing sometimes if you've got people that are creative offensively with initiating and can get people the ball in their spots. They don't have any of that. Like, Jalen Suggs is essentially playing point guard for them, but he is not a true point guard. He's more of a combo guard. He's like a Marcus Smart type, where you're like, you can play him on offense as a point guard, but he's not going to be the guy that's running the sets and getting everybody the ball in their spots, like I mentioned. So because of that, they rely so much on just Paolo and Franz to do it for them. And it's basically like Paolo, his life has been so hard on this team because they just don't have a guy that can get him the ball in a spot. He has to get to his spot with the ball anytime he wants to score there, which is way harder than when you've got a reliable ball handler that can just set you up like that. And so that part of it is not really addressed still, in my opinion. Like, I just talked about how Bane can do some of that. But again, he's a secondary creator. He's a secondary initiator. Like, he's not a primary guy there. He addresses the shooting issue, and he will still help them with initiating and creating and all that stuff, because it's just another guy that can do it. But again, it's not his bread and butter. It's more of an add-on to what his core skill sets are. And so they will still be lacking some of that, and it's still going to be Paolo being tasked with a lot of primary ball handling, a lot of primary creation and initiating. And I think he's probably up to the task. But again, it's just that issue is not addressed yet. I still would maybe like to see them add, even if it's just a backup, some sort of organizer on the offensive end. I wonder if a guy like Mike Conley, if, for example, if they make an upgrade or trade for a Durant or something like that, and Conley suddenly is available, like a guy like that would be a great fit, in my opinion, who can still shoot a little bit, but just an adult in the backcourt. Not that Bane and Suggs aren't, but just from a skill set perspective, that their main objective is to just get guys the ball in their spots. And that's, like I mentioned, I think that's why KCP had such a bad year, because nobody was doing that. And Paolo and Franz can pass. They're good passers, but again, they're secondary passers. They're not initiators. They're more guys that are getting downhill looking to score, and then they'll pass depending on how the defense reacts to them. And so the question for Orlando is, can they contend? They've got a very talented group, and the East is very, very weak going into next year between Dame being out, Tatum being out, and it was already on the weaker side with those guys playing fully healthy anyway. And then the Cavs, they're talented, but still real question marks about how legit are they, just because 3 straight years, flame outs in the playoffs. And of course, you've got the Indianas, the New Yorks of the world, but it gets really bleak after that. And so there's real opportunity for Orlando or some of these other teams to take a step next year and be a top 3-4 seed and make a run towards the Eastern Conference Finals. So I think, given that, I don't think it's crazy to think this team could find themselves in the Eastern Conference Finals next year. I'm not ready to call them like a full-on championship contender, but I think this is a legitimate needle mover where like they are a clear step up, a clear tier up from where they were. No question about it, in my opinion. They're still going to be elite defensively. They're going to have another year of development for Paolo and Franz. And as I've said, Bane is a phenomenal secondary piece, a really good complementary guy to your star players. And so to me, whether they truly contend is going to come down to one thing, one very simple thing, and it is Paolo Banchero's development. I really think they will go as far as he goes, because if he plays at an all NBA level guy, then I think absolutely they can contend, because that's the number one thing to the formula when you're trying to contend is like, do you have the guy, the star player that can carry you? And I think we've seen Paolo, like his game is actually like translated really well to the postseason. He almost feels more comfortable in those settings. But again, the consistency isn't always there. The efficiency is not always there. So he needs to get more efficient, be more consistent. I think Bane will help with a lot of that, because just taking some of the pressure off of him. But he also just needs to continue to grow there. And it sucks that he didn't really get a full year this year, because it looked like he was getting off to a great start before he had that elongated injury. But it's really that simple for me. I think if he remains the same guy with a not great efficiency and consistent night to night, then I think that, I mean, they could win a series, but I don't see them making much noise other than that. But if he turns into this perennial all-star, pushing all NBA type level guy, then I think, yes, I think they can at least contend in the East. I'll say that. Do I think they're beating Oklahoma City? Probably not, for example. But this trade at least puts them in position to strike as a contender if Paolo takes that leap that they're going to need him. But regardless of any move they made, that was always going to be something that they needed. And the last thing I'll say for Orlando, though, is that this move is only a little risky because of the quantity of assets they give up, like I said, not because I think they're going to badly miss those assets, but because it limits what they can do moving forward. Like this was the trade. If they were going to give up that many picks and a lot of what they had to offer other teams, like they now don't have the assets to make another big all-in type move. They can make more marginal moves on the edges still, but they traded their most like mid-size tradable salary in KCP. So now any other move is going to have to be a lot of smaller salary guys or one of their core 4 guys, which I don't think they want to move them. And then they don't really have the picks either. So there is some risk here, because if this doesn't work out, then there's not much of a pivot. But like I said, to me, I think it's a gamble worth taking, especially considering the context of the East and how good the team could be if their younger guys take the leap that they need to. Then moving to the Grizzlies part of this, I think this was awesome value for them. I know I said that it was worth giving up all the picks from Orlando's perspective, but it doesn't make getting all those picks any less exciting if you're Memphis, because to get 4 first plus 1 swap for a non-all-star player, like Bane is an awesome guy. I think he's in the top 50-ish players in the league, but he's not an all-star, and he probably never will be. And he's going to probably be the third fiddle on this team. And that's okay for Orlando. But it's still, anytime you can get that kind of value back for a non-all-star type guy, I think you just got to do it. Unless you're just fully in a contender position. But Memphis wasn't. And so you just got to pounce on that kind of value. Like I said, it's kind of similar to the Mikal Bridges trade, which that has aged really well for the Nets. And I think this one will too for Memphis, even if Orlando goes on to do big things with Bane. I don't think it's necessarily going to be a bad thing for Memphis, because they still have so many assets now because of this deal. And this was maybe rumored for Memphis to switch things up a little bit. They obviously fired Taylor Jenkins towards the end of the regular season. Their trio, their big 3, if you want to call it that, they've just been inconsistent, mostly with their durability. Like those three guys, Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr. In the 5 years that they've all been on the Grizzlies, they have played only 139 games together in 5 years. They played 37 this year, 9 in 2024, 29 in 2023, 53 in 2022, and 11 in 2021. So they've only reached the 40 game mark one out of the 5 years that they were all on the team together, and they never reached the 60 game mark. So like it was always one guy out, or they just couldn't get the consistency or continuity there. Like that's an average of 28 games played together per season. Like that's just, you can't expect to make any kind of noise if your top three guys are playing together that scarcely. They just couldn't stay all on the court at the same time. And I don't really know if I think that trio fully healthy playing 80 games is good enough to really fully contend either. We saw how far away they were in this postseason when they got absolutely destroyed by the Thunder. And it's unfair to be like, well, the Thunder are really good. I'm like, well, that's the standard for contending. And we've seen two teams now take the Thunder to at least a 6-game series. So they're not unbeatable in some of these games. And I think that the front office probably agrees with me. And that's why they made this move, because they were not, with those three guys, going to get where they wanted to be. And they just haven't had that much success. I mean, they won 50 plus games a couple times, were a top 2 seed, but they just haven't had any real playoff success. They won one playoff series with this core. So I understand their thought process. And Bane's only been in the league 5 years, but he's on the older side. Like I said, he turns 27 in like 10 days or something like that. So he kind of is what he is at this point. It's not like he was going to develop into some other all-star player next to Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson or anything like that. But I do wonder if this decision is somewhat cap driven as well. It's been well documented that Jaren Jackson Jr. is entering the final year of his deal and is due for a big raise. He's only making about $23 million this coming season. He's eligible for a 4-year extension. And Ja has 3 years left on his 5-year deal as well, and is also eligible for an extension. So it's like, if you pay Jaren Jackson Jr., then that would be a lot of money for 3 guys to basically not be a contender. Like that would be 120 plus million per year for those 3 guys for a roster that, again, maybe could make the second round if things break their way during a season. And like, that's about it. So I think that they just realized that, and not that they're just like cutting money to cut money, but they needed to kind of reevaluate where their core guys are, especially with the landscape of today's CBA. And it's just like, it's really hard to have a really expensive roster if you're not clearly in a position to win, because there's so many penalties and things that come with having an expensive roster and the lack of flexibility. So, but this does make you wonder what they'll do next, because they could go really one of two ways here. They could repurpose some of those assets and look to upgrade their roster elsewhere. I think a lineup of Ja Morant, KCP, some good two-way 20 to 25 point per game scorer at the small forward position with Jaren Jackson, and then Edey or whoever else they have at center. That's intriguing, especially if you added assets alongside to upgrade other parts of the roster. And I think if they do add someone to try to go that direction, I do think it needs to be a wing. I think that they have lacked consistency there and size there. But the problem is there's not a ton of like real good options. Like Kevin Durant is probably the best one that's available that you could think of. But that deal's tough for a couple of reasons. One, because with the way the salaries work, you almost have to put Jaren Jackson Jr. in the deal to make the money work, which of course, why even trade for KD at that point if you're including Jackson, because you want to pair him with him to actually be a contender. But if you're just swapping them, then it's like you could argue you didn't even necessarily improve. And then also, like, does Kevin Durant want to go there? Like that could open a whole can of worms in its own thing. And so that just makes it difficult. And then you look around the league, who else they could add. Like the only other thing I could really think, because there's just not really a lot of guys out there, the ideal type of player that I think would get them over the top. You could say maybe Giannis. It seems like he's going to stay put for now, but they've got the picks to make a deal now. That's all I'll say. I don't know if they did before, but if you do Jaren Jackson Jr. with 6, 7 picks, like it's going to be hard for Milwaukee to turn that down. And I'm sure other teams could maybe get close to that, but that's about probably as good of an offer as you're going to get. So maybe this is a play to get to that point where when he asks out, they're in that sweepstakes and they try to go with Ja and Giannis, which is obviously a very intriguing pairing. But you'd have to definitely put enough shooting around those guys because neither of them are great shooters. And it's fair to question what Ja Morant's ceiling is now, which is how inconsistent and unreliable he's been over the past few years. But then the other side is they could blow this thing up and they could look at next year. That's a stacked, loaded draft. There's 3 to 4 awesome prospects at the top between AJ DeBanza, Darren Peterson, Cameron Boozer. If you want to throw Nate Ament in there, like it's a good draft. And so if they wanted to try to bottom out, one, it'd be kind of easy because the West is so stacked. Like almost everybody's going for it. So someone's got to finish 15th, 14th in the West next year. Probably Utah 15th. But after that, it's like somebody's got to be 14th. So it's up for grabs if someone wants it. So if Memphis wanted to go that way, wouldn't be that hard. But then also getting one of those guys as a building block around Ja, for example, could be potentially franchise changing. So we saw this year with the lottery. It doesn't always work out that way for some of these teams, but it's at least something to consider because do they want to give Jaren Jackson Jr. big money? You know, he's a really good player, an all-star caliber guy, but he's got real limitations. Like he doesn't rebound the ball. He commits dumb fouls. His shooting is honestly quite overrated. I know he gets talked about as a really good floor spacer. He's only a 35% career shooter from three, which is below league average. So he can shoot, but he doesn't do it super consistently. He's still not really I don't think his bag offensively is deep enough for my liking either, for me to say he's like a number 2 on a championship team, for example. Like he just isn't a creator on that end for himself. He really does need to rely on other people to get him the ball in his spots. And he's more of a play finisher and not a play initiator. And so there are question marks about Jackson. And do you want to tie up a $40+ million per year on this guy, whatever the number ends up being from a extension, just to, again, probably not content. And so you could get something really nice on the open market for him. I don't know if you get the exact same package you got for Bane, but probably something similar. I think you get at least 3 first-round picks for Jackson, depending on who's in the market for him there. But I think a lot of teams would be interested in him. So they could be up there for the highest quantity of draft assets in the NBA if they decide to go that path, even if they then keep Ja. Because honestly, I don't think I would trade Ja. I just don't think you're going to get equal value. I think I'd rather have him run it back and try to rebuild some of his value before you would consider that. But obviously we'll see. But I think if you're going to blow it up, I think Jackson is the obvious piece to move here, especially just considering the contract situation where they maybe don't want to pay him. They already paid Ja, so that also is a complicating factor there. And ultimately, I think both directions are defendable. I think if they try to add a Kevin Durant or someone of that caliber to try to continue to compete because they have a lot of really good players on this roster, then I think that's very fair and defendable. But I think if they wanted to trade Jackson and bottom out for a year or two and then retool from there, I also think that would be defendable. But the thing that I think is probably the least defendable is if they just stand pat. Like if they just go into next year with Ja and Jaren Jackson and KCP and Edie and Jalen Wells and the other guys they got, Scottie Pippen Jr., et cetera, and just kind of ride the middle, then that will be where I'll be like, okay, they're not doing this thing correctly, because they'll probably just be a play-in team if they do that, maybe even worse. They could even be in the 12-13 range, but they won't be bad enough to be really in the running for a top pick, but they have no shot to contend in the playoffs and probably wouldn't even make the playoffs because they're a worse team now than they were before this trade. And they already were barely sneaking in as an 8 seed this past year with Bane. So to me, I think they just need to be decisive, pick a direction, whichever direction that is, that's okay. I think it's defendable. I would support it. But overall, very good trade for Memphis. I thought this was just a win-win deal across the board for both sides that did really well for themselves. And it's not often you get to say that. So I'm excited to see Bane on the Magic, and I'm interested to see what Memphis decides to do next. And that's going to do it for this episode of the Sean Jones NBA Show. We have Game 5, the decisive Game 5, tomorrow night on Monday, which again will probably be today by the time you're listening to this. but very excited. As I said, this has just been an awesome finals, in my opinion, one of the best ones we've had in a while, probably since 2021, but potential to be even better than that series. We'll see how the rest of it plays out, but these teams are just fun to watch. It's been a really good matchup across the board, better than probably anyone could have expected. And then we will see on the trade front. This was the first big one that we've had, or really the first one we've had at all since the offseason started, but I anticipate, Kevin Durant's probably going to get dealt. There'll probably be some other things. The draft's coming up, so there's going to be a lot to discuss even outside of the finals, and I'm excited to talk to you guys about it. So with that said, thank you so much for listening, and I will chat with you.